Hello friends, welcome to this session. In today's session, we will see how you can set up DAX cluster, also known as DynamoDB Accelerator, to improve performance of queries. When you run queries against DynamoDB table, normally it will provide response within millisecond, but if you want to get response up to microseconds, then if you can use DynamoDB Accelerator. So if you want to read more about what is DEX cluster, when should it be used, what are the different use cases, how this cache works, for that either you can go to AWS documentation. There is a lot of information provided, something like this: in memory acceleration with DynamoDB Accelerator, or you can watch some other videos which provide details how this works. In this demo session, I will focus on how we can set up DEX cluster in private subnet so that client can connect to DEX cluster and DEX cluster can access DynamoDB table through VPC endpoint. This way the whole traffic remains within AWS network. So as this diagram shows, we will have a setup with VPC, public subnet and private subnet. We will have a EC2 instance bastion in public subnet, using which we'll connect to EC2 instance in private subnet, and our client will run here. For a client, I will just use a Python script to show how using that script you can connect to DynamoDB table using DEX cluster and VPC endpoint. There will be no NAT gateway because we will try to connect to DynamoDB within AWS network using VPC endpoint. So in one of my previous videos, I have already shown how you can access DynamoDB table from private subnet through VPC endpoint. That setup is still available for me to use in this demo. So I will just show how to create DEX cluster and make it accessible to your client. Rest of the resources for the setup I will not create. I will provide you the link for my previous video. You can go through that and see how that was set up. So let's get started. So log into AWS, go to DynamoDB, and here in tables you can see I have already created this table. This was as per the previous demo. Now on the left side, go to DEX clusters, click on create cluster, enter a name. Then in node families you can select whichever type of resource you need for VM. I will use T family and I will use the smallest one for demo purpose. Cluster size, always recommended to have 3 nodes so that one is available in every availability zone in one region, but for this demo purpose I will just use one just to show how this works. Then subnets, we can create a new subnet group. I have already created a group, so I will use the one existing one and I will use a private subnet so that this cluster creates its node in private subnet. If you use create new, you can give a name and then you can select your VPC ID, and then in that VPC whichever is private subnet you can select them and save it. So this one. Now in access control, it needs a security group which will allow access into DEX cluster. Now I can show you this security group I have already created, and it allows access on port 9111. This is when you will enable encryption of data in rest and transit. If you're not encrypting your data, then you can use 8111. So this port number changes. Then availability zones. Next, IAM permissions. Now this role is the one that cluster nodes will assume when accessing your DynamoDB table. So this will provide access to your table. I have already created one, but you can create a new one if you need. Just give a name and a policy name, it will create for you. You can specify your specific table if you want, or you can give all tables. The role which I have already created, I will access that DEX to DynamoDB, and this is where if you turn them off then the port will be 8111, but I'm keeping them on, so my port will be 9111. Next, and then here it's parameter group. You can select default or you can create your own, because here you can mention how long the cache should live, based on the query or based on the item. Maintenance window tags as default. Next, and then you can review and then create cluster. So DEX cluster is now provisioned and it's up. Now we'll try to connect to Bastion. I will use putty to connect. I already have the connection set up. So we'll open it, and from Bastion we'll try to log in to private EC2. So we'll SSH, and here I have this client in DynamoDB folder. So these are the Python scripts which will run to access data and see the time difference. Now first we'll try to query directly DynamoDB and see how much time it takes to respond. And there are around 100 records in that table which we have queried, and it took around 0.368 seconds. We'll just run a couple of times. 0.50 this time, again 0.50. So it varies from 0.3 to 0.5. Right now it's going 0.442. Now we'll try to run this query using DAX. For that you have to go back to DAX cluster and copy this endpoint, and when you run the query you will pass the DAX endpoint, which indicates that this query should contact DAX and get the data from there. So we'll run it again and immediately see the response time is 0.129, which is quite good improvement, and it's around zero point 0.1 all the time because it caches the response and it's faster to respond. Whereas if we run without DAX, it is still 0.42 seconds around. Similarly, we can try to see how response time changes if we scan the table. So we can do scan directly with DynamoDB table first, and response time is around 0.0187 seconds. If we pass DEX, so we need to copy the DEX endpoint again and scan through here. So you can see it is 0.0071, whereas it was 0.0187 seconds. So it does improve the response time through DEX cluster. That's it for this session. I hope this has helped you to understand that response time for your queries will improve once you use DEX cluster. I will provide the links for this Python script in the description below so that you can also try out yourself. Thank you so much for watching this session. We'll see you in the next one.